A calm sea is an illusion. There is always the unexpected lurking just below the surface. And when chaos erupts, some can swim to the shore, while others will sink into the abyss. Your host, Chris Cain, is an insurance adjuster and also an agent licensed in multiple states. He spent over 30 years helping people with claims, and this podcast is to help business owners, supervisors, and employees to be prepared before and after a work comp injury occurs. Batten down the hatches and join us as we navigate the sea of confusion.
Hello, I'm your host, Chris Cain, and thank you for joining us. Today's topic is policy coverage. Imagine that for a minute that you're a company in Tennessee and you've bought insurance with 3A and 3C coverages for Tennessee and Georgia only. However, a job comes up, and for the last 45 days, you've been sending employees regularly to the state of Kentucky. During this time frame, an accident occurs and an employee is killed. The state of this employee, because of the lucrative Kentucky statute regarding death benefits, decides to have the claim covered under Kentucky, also known as the election of remedies. They declined to file their claim under Tennessee or Georgia. You go back to the insurance company, and since it had been longer than 30 days since you'd had operations in Kentucky, they declined to provide Kentucky workers' compensation coverage. Or worse yet, your insurance company was not licensed to write coverage in Kentucky to begin with, and there's no way that they can provide coverage under the Kentucky statute. This puts not only the company at risk, the claim now must be paid pursuant to workers' compensation statutes in Kentucky out of your operating capital. This is why understanding your policy coverage is so important. Before setting the sail, pirates were organized and had a code of how they would divide up stolen goods, what acts of disobedience would require discipline, and how the crews would be compensated if they were injured. Once the sail was hoisted, they faced a flurry of sea and battles with guns, blades, or cannons. The odds were that someone would be badly injured. When that happened, they had a compensation system for the loss of an arm, leg, eye, or finger. Granted, you had to survive the medical procedure and recovery time, but if you lived, you were well compensated up to a year's wages or more. They even had a system of putting you back to work in a less physically demanding role. Pirates understood the importance of taking care of their crew. In this podcast, we want to help you take care of your crew. The workers' compensation policy, out of all the policies that are written, is probably the most simple in nature. What the policy states is that it will provide coverage for whatever state's laws, statutes, and rules may provide. Therefore, it's very important that you understand the 3A and 3C coverages. This is on the declarations page of the policy. 3A basically states that it will cover all states that are listed. Usually it's the states that you have operations in at the time of the policy being written. Let's take, for example, you have operations in Tennessee and operations in Georgia. You would have under 3A, Tennessee and Georgia listed. Now, under 3C coverage, this coverage usually starts out by excluding the monopolistic states. Those states are Ohio, North Dakota, Washington, and Wyoming. The reason why these are excluded is that these states have programs that are administered by the states, and no insurance company is allowed to write coverage in these states because all of it has to go through the state fund. The second items that are excluded under 3C coverage are obviously the states that are already listed in under 3A. Then you will have a list of states that are available for coverage. Ideally, you would like to have all states and territories. However, in most cases, that's not always available. especially if you have a regional workers' compensation coverage that may only write workers' compensation in 6 or 7 states, and other states they're not licensed to write. It's important to know this because let's say you go to Kentucky and you start operations. If you know you're going to be in there more than 30 days, you're required to let the carrier know so they can move the state of Kentucky from 3C to 3A coverage. If the policy does not provide for Kentucky's under 3C, it may be a situation where you have to go to another carrier to get a policy just to cover that state. There are options available, but being aware of what these coverages are is very important. Let's switch gears now to the different types of employers or companies that purchase workers' compensation. Most smaller companies, it's just an expense. They buy the workers' compensation policies, rely on their agent, and then throw it into a file drawer. The larger companies that have claims on a routine basis are usually more complex and more educated in the coverages that they are purchasing. They know that they have to have workers' comp coverage for contracts and to do business in certain states. They understand that the premium is calculated by the payroll and by the class code. And this is important because the class code, which is provided by SIC and then your scopes manual, and also adopted by the individual insurance carriers, all have different rates. For example, a rate for a roofer is obviously a whole lot more than a rate for a clerical person. Why? The risks are less. A roofer has the risk of falling off a high level. An office worker, while they still could be injured, still has a lower risk of it happening. Where it gets trickier is when you have smaller companies or startup companies. They're just out trying to make ends meet. They have employees that are doing multiple tasks and trying to make sure that the class codes meet what they're doing. For example, a common one is handyman. The handyman may be working on a roof one day and then installing a mailbox the next day. Both have different risks. Roofers have the risk of falling off the roof. Working on a mailbox, you have the risk of being struck by a car. Both have their own risk, but it's a different rate for both of them. A question we get asked a lot is, does a licensed general contractor need workers' compensation coverage, even if they don't have employees? If you're hiring subcontractors as a general contractor, you need to have workers' compensation just as a backup to when a subcontractor may have a lapse in coverage, may have not bought proper coverage, like we talked about in 3A and 3C coverage. They may have purchased a policy that doesn't cover the state that you're working in. That's why it's important when you get these certificates that you've asked the specific questions as to what states are covered. But the other real risk is when an injured worker gets hurt and they're a subcontractor, and the subcontractor, for whatever reason, has a problem with their coverage. The states in general are not going to let an injured worker go without coverage. They do what is called up the ladder coverage. In other words, if the main employer, that being the sub, doesn't have coverage, but they were doing work for a general contractor, they will go up the ladder to that general contractor to provide coverage. Same way with bringing a subcontractor into a plant. If that subcontractor doesn't have coverage and they get hurt in the plant, the company could be faced with a workers' compensation claim in that they were the ones that had hired the subcontractor. There's been very serious injuries where disputes over coverage has arose But a common factor, barring any fraud, is usually the states look to find coverage either with the subcontractor or with the general contractor, or going again right up the ladder. Let's change it up a minute. Lauren is here with me, and Lauren, do you have any questions for me?
Hey Dad, I got about 3 questions for you today. Our first question is from a volunteer, and they want to know if they are covered under work comp.
That's a good question, and it varies by state. For example, in Tennessee, a volunteer does have coverage, but the coverage is only for medical benefits, and that's only if the insured has elected to have them covered under the workers' compensation. It does not provide for any loss of income benefits because, by nature of a volunteer, you're not being paid. There are volunteer policies that are available for purchase. Those policies provide additional coverages and vary by insurance companies on the actual coverages for premium.
Our second question comes from a supervisor. They have a sports team at work that plays on the weekends and want to know if they're covered under work comp if they get hurt.
Under sports teams, that's always been a question as to whether they're covered. It's never a true, yes they are, no they're not. In Tennessee, they have come up with a statute that workers' compensation benefits may be awarded under specific circumstances. And those circumstances are usually, is the employee required to participate? In other words, are you having a sports event that everyone has to participate? Most of the time it's either a softball or baseball or basketball, some sort of group team building activity. Then the question of it is there a benefit for the employer for the employee to participate? In other words, are they sponsoring a team and they're wearing, ABC widgets for sale on the back of their jerseys, or getting publicity for it? For whatever reason, that's a benefit for the employer. The other part of the scenario is are these sports being played during work hours? If they're during work hours, it's pretty much going to be considered a workers' compensation claim. But again, these all vary from situations to situations. Just a minor change in the facts. Let's just say, well, yes, it was a sports team, but it was voluntary because everybody wanted to go to Florida sort of as a vacation and using the excuse of a ball team. It wasn't required. Nobody was getting paid. Everybody took vacation to do it. Those types of facts go into it on determining whether the event and somebody getting hurt is compensable. The better source to cover that when you do have teams of sports teams is to actually buy a policy to cover those type of events. That way you've got a policy in place specifically for that, and you're not relying solely on the workers' compensation coverage.
Alright, my last question is from a business owner who wants to know if there's a way to reduce the premiums on their work comp policy.
This question comes up a lot, and really the basis of the question is what you have to look at. It goes down to the difference between price and cost. If you're looking just for the price, the main way to do that is to shop around to different insurance carriers. But if you're really serious about getting the price down, is to look at the cost that you're spending on claims, the cost that you do for loss control, and things of that nature that make you a better risk. What insurance is as core is taking the risk and deferring that to a third party, being an insurance company. If the risk is lower, the rates are lower. If the risk is higher, obviously the price gets higher. If you're doing risky things, if you're doing things that are not within OSHA guidelines, not doing proper safety protocols, you present yourself as a higher risk for having an accident, or you have a history of accidents, that's going to result in a higher rate. If you're doing the things like drug-free workplace, employee safety meetings, going over safety procedures, have written safety procedures that everybody goes over at least weekly, if not monthly, you can present yourself as a better risk to the insurance company. But you have to present that to the insurance company. Even insurance companies themselves, if you will notice, an insurance company may have 3 or 4 different insurance carriers listed underneath the umbrella of their company. Each of these carriers have filed for different rates and are different tiers inside the insurance company. What you want to do as an employer is present yourself through your agent as being a quality client to get the best insurance tier inside of that insurance company's arsenal of coverages. That way, you know you can get the better rates, which in turn gets you the better price. So to say I just want better price, is sort of just shopping the policy. Whereas if you're serious about getting a better cost, you do the things with your agent to sit there and do everything you can to loss control your risk, and be a better presenter to the insurance company of what they're insuring. That will give you a better cost. It will give you a better price. Those were great questions. You can see how insurance can get chaotic and how quick a claim can be mishandled. Now, my pet peeve as an adjuster and an agent, and I've seen it a lot, is when people get their policies and they just stick them in a file cabinet. They don't read it. They don't, at the very least, double check the states they're covered for. Doing that one job in a state you're not covered can cost you a lot of money if an accident or death happens. It can be easily prevented if you just check the states on the policy, or at least call your agent and have a discussion with them. Well, I'm going to drop anchor here. That's enough insurance talk for one day. I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks so much for listening.
Thank you for your support of this podcast. For additional information, please visit our website, workcompchaos.com. All links available in the description below. Until next time, fair winds and following seas.